Great. So we're down to the last presentation, and this is certainly last but not least. This is Alternative Resource Group led by Michael Lumley. This is a really, really great project that these guys are doing in the energy space. These guys have a ton of experience in the energy business already, and they're really revolutionizing the way that power is generated and delivered for the new economy. So looking forward to hearing more about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to the BX3 team for putting all this together. Obviously, there's a lot of good talent in here. Very humbled to be representing them on such an esteemed group. So my name is Michael Lumley. I'm with ARG, Alternative Resource Group. We're an energy development group that has been focusing on clean energy projects. I've been in the energy business for a long time, but we and one of the other principals about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, we're working on one of our projects down just across the border of Mexico. And we were looking at securing some finance for one of the construction phases. These are just some of the presentations on our evolving projects. And we were looking at essentially 200% energy development costs against what we normally see for standard projects in the United States. And we kept fishing, kept seeing the same egregious costs for the quote we kept getting was emerging markets. One of the other principals and I were investing, trading in cryptos, and so almost as a flippant reaction, we said, well, we could just raise our own fund and do this ourselves. Well, very quickly, layers of value start to show up whenever we started thinking that through, and that kind of took us through an interesting process. We started with Nathan McDonald, myself, and Gene Dennis. Nathan and I have worked together on projects for going on almost 7 years now. But Nathan was the principal in a group that was developing a 160 megawatt system down in South Texas, and I was working with him on that. As I was working on a number of different projects, and then over the years we connected with Gene, who is also a natural gas and oil and gas developer down in Mexico, and we came together to really try to put together some interesting projects in Mexico. So as I said, we started with the concept of developing finance for our project in Matamoros, Mexico. Due to the issues with the finance, we decided, started talking through the tokenizing a fund for project development and project implementation. We were going through the standard, buy-in, every book we had, secured offtake, all the standard things that an energy project needs to move forward. And one of the things that we quickly began to realize is this allows you to do something that is pretty revolutionary. If you can take a project fund, tokenize it, and reduce the project finance costs, you can bring a lower cost structure than any of your competition. So essentially, this allows you to bring a lower price of kilowatt hours to different people. Then, as you look at the energy spectrum, there's always the underlying issue of security, and we'll touch on that in just a second. But that is what led us to tokenizing funding coming up with the ARG token. So, as we're looking at the economic forces, we started looking at what has changed in the last few years that's really kind of pushing this. And this is just driving our core business. So you've got the cost of clean energy has come down to the point where essentially natural gas and solar development is essentially the dominant price point technology on the market. So you've already started out with the lowest possible cost in technologies. Then you combine that with tariffs in the United States, for all of you outside of the solar space. Panels have been seeing tariffs for the last couple of years, but then of course now we have the new implementation of steel and aluminum tariffs. Well, what that does is that creates a big constraint on these really mature supply chains that are trying to bring all this equipment and materials into the United States, and they're looking for somebody else, somewhere else close by to utilize this. And then that we looked across the fence and said, well, beyond that, the operating system's also going to, we process over $1 trillion of energy transactions annually in the energy industry. So between that and the social forces of all the people, essentially, I don't know anybody in this room who probably hasn't seen some sort of personal impact of climate change and how that's both influencing and affecting us on an individual level, but also globally, it can be pretty terrible. The fact that people are very aware that its emissions, and essentially the largest source of emissions is energy production, and people want to see this change, but they also want to be a part of making things better. And what I always tell people is, despite all the negative press, there are a lot of good things happening and a lot of good things that can happen as the economy is growing, as long as you do it properly. So then you've got specifically what's happening right now is our cost for implementation on the higher production, the higher efficiency technologies, the dual access tracking, single access tracking is actually cheaper than using fixed tilt systems. So you can increase production by 20% while using it at a lower price point than just using your fixed tilt systems. Then you've got your smart grid technologies that we need to operate these electrical systems that we can build on this blockchain backbone. And essentially what you've got is a moment in time that opens up an enormous opportunity for a better system, a better way. So what we do is we're bringing an opportunity for people of every class, especially, it was like it was touched on earlier, the Asian markets as far as investment. This is an asset class, one on our side of the fence that is very easily understood by traditional finance. But if you go over to the Asian markets, and if you look at India and Africa, you've got a burgeoning middle class that wants to invest in something that has high solid returns and is very safe and stable. Well, we are exactly the traditional asset class with a solid 20+% return on investment rate that essentially is the kind of thing the Rockefellers grew wealthy on 100 years ago. But it's also been traditionally an asset class that was pretty much reserved for investment banks. It was really outside the reach for everyday investors. And so what this does is not only opens up that market and creates that economic opportunity for people, everyday people to invest, but it also helps them drive the energy projects that they want to see coming out of the world. So this sort of convergence of utilizing the blockchain beyond all the returns of the energy investment also gives them a chance to be a part of owning a system and a platform that could potentially be used as the underlying exchange for $1 trillion of annual energy purchases and trades. And I believe, overjumped myself, but that number is actually expected to go up 28% before 2040. So there's enormous growth opportunity. There's a desperate need for security and stability in these operating systems. And we had a chance to bring together both. I will say we have one of the value propositions that we had seriously overlooked, just because it seemed pretty basic to us, but some of our investment partners and some of the investors that we've had interest from actually brought to our attention that our ability to do project acquisition of currently operating assets was also a phenomenal value offer for traditional investors, because in the US, if you're going to invest in renewable energy projects, you have essentially a 7-year lockup to be the tax equity. You have to hold that asset for 7 years. By us being essentially a vehicle that will purchase and hold the assets, they can purchase and liquidate their position and not suffer those consequences. So we're sort of, I mean, we're developers. We're close to the assets themselves, and we didn't really think of the other problems that this solves on the financial side of the fence. But it was once we started walking through that, it's actually something that has opened the door with one of our large investment partners so far. So the levels that we're going for essentially come in as we're looking for, we established a soft cap of $13.5 million, because essentially that would cover the costs of all the entitlements on one of these projects. That would also allow us to do the blockchain development, as well as provide operating capital throughout the implementation. Our target raise for the total for the project is $84 million, which is equivalent to the 30% equity position that anybody who's normally going to traditionally go out and finance one of these projects. The 30% equity position is what you normally take to any of the institutional investment groups that are going to supply all the leveraged debt. But because at the time we began the process, there was a lot of limitless raises that were happening in the market, and that kind of seemed like that was really kind of tainting everything as a money grab. We essentially decided that we wanted to put a $280 million hard cap on the raise, because that would essentially buy an entire project outright. You would not have to finance anything. And frankly, if we raised that much capital in the Asian markets, and after we go through the initial raise and achieved our 30% equity position, that we didn't want this to be a runaway raise, and we were the crypto markets were a slightly more playful game back then, and so we were thinking that we could potentially get into the Asian markets and start seeing investment, because there's a very large appetite for infrastructure projects in Asia and Asian investment. So what we wanted to do is limit this to something where we could absolutely utilize that, especially in a portfolio acquisition strategy, but still had a ceiling on it, so it wasn't some limitless grab. So whenever we talk about how much these projects cost and exactly what that looks like, so like I said, we are a clean energy development group. So our projects include natural gas, solar, and energy storage. One of the things that's tough to tell people who don't work in the energy industry is when you see these extraordinarily warm periods, these summers where you've got temperatures going well beyond what has been seen in the past, and systems are strained, when those systems get to that limited capacity, there is a momentary opportunity. It's called peak demand. And by having energy storage assets, both connected to solar systems and natural gas systems, you can passively charge these things when there's not an enormous demand in the system, but monetize that to the tune of 27 cents a kilowatt hour in some situations. In Texas this year, let's see, what was the highest? I think we hit just over $1,300 a megawatt hour. That's $130 kilowatt hour. So it doesn't take many of those before you've really had a nuclear shot in the arm for your revenue tables. But like I said, we can't plan for the hottest days of the year. We don't know what the grid constraints are going to look like, but we built these things into our projects because they provide phenomenal opportunities. Aside from that, to go along with our strategy of lowering emissions globally by 50% from energy production and consumption, we also include low emission refineries because these are very small footprint, 40-acre size refineries that produce ultra low sulfur fuels and prevent people from doing things like refining the heavy stuff from Venezuela and doing these ultra high. People don't really think about the supply chain aspect of emissions. To extract resources, refine it in one part of the world, then carry it halfway across the globe and burn it somewhere else in some other application. It's one of the most ridiculous overreaches of infrastructure that I've ever seen. As an energy guy, you start to see these weaknesses in the system. So we include this because not only do we eliminate that supply chain issue, but we also can create a cleaner fuel, usually from waste products out of production sites, like wet gas is one of our major utilizations. We'll take what is essentially natural gas out of the oil supply and then refine that and create these fuels out of it. So one of those projects, that specific project, so not Morris, is a $267 million investment. Now, from the energy created, the revenue, it's the sale of the energy itself, you have $65 million worth of revenue created, and out of the low emission refinery, you have $127 million worth of revenue created. Now, that's a pretty phenomenal return considering you've got 192 in revenue. However, there is the ongoing operations and maintenance that's involved in that, which, as you might imagine with a refinery, eats up quite a bit. So, in the end, what you get is a total revenue stream of $113 million. So, again, going back to the heyday where this entire thing got kicked off, people were looking at 1,000x, 100x opportunities, thinking, that was the only way to go. We're a different class than that in one sense. From the energy project itself, you get this $113 million revenue stream. So that's a paltry 30+% return on investment annually. Pretty safe bet, and a very good investment for groups around the world. However, this doesn't capture the potential revenue from the energy exchange platform. By creating this energy exchange platform with one of our profound partner, a group that we actually met with BX3 at the World Blockchain Forum here in New York, you have a chance to capture a sliver of these transactions, of these trillions of dollars worth of transactions as you follow these through them. So not only do we have the opportunity to create that platform, we also have the very projects to test market this on. So we can roll out beta 1, 2, 3, and expand the software platform and refine its operation within our own systems as we are attached to these larger trading systems. So when you talk about working up your product, your demonstration product in a controlled environment, you sort of have this phenomenal opportunity to do it in your own backyard. With the revenue that we're going to bring in from this side of the project, 50% is going to go to buyback coins. What we fully expect is that in the beginning, the people that are going to come in and invest in the projects are going to be, well, especially in the United States, obviously accredited investors, but large institutional players. We fully expect those groups are going to be long-term hold positions that are going to essentially want to hold just like anybody would for these assets. While 35% is going to go to the acquisition of portfolio assets and then also development of future projects that will go into the portfolio, as well as 15% for the platform development for the blockchain system. So you've got the ongoing development of the software, the development of new assets, and then the buyback, all contributing to the value, the underlying value of the token itself that we will create. And then half the tokens that are bought back annually will be retired from the system, creating further upward pressure. Then we have essentially the distribution and coin creation on the project. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the groups that we're working with is the Windmill Enterprise Group. So that's the group we met at World Blockchain Forum. So this is a group that in Texas, there's for all of you non-energy geeks, the guys who run the grid are called ERCOT. So ERCOT does almost $100 billion worth of exchanges on their energy trading desk annually. They put out an RFP for a group to develop a blockchain-based system to operate their grid. And the funny thing is, Windmill, our partner on the software development, had the proposal, essentially had done the architecture, was ready to help roll out that project for them, when they turned around and said they'd give it back to IBM if they didn't charge them more than $10 million a year. Well, that was a huge win for us, because when we came across Windmill and told them about what we were doing, we had somebody who not only understood the process and was a very solid blockchain development group that's actually working on a couple of solutions for the healthcare sector, but they also understand all of the energy trading aspects and dynamics of working in the energy space. So we came to the table with a partner that already understood the business model, the platform, and had the architecture already written for us. They have connected us with the Energy Web Foundation, which is a group that's working together to set essentially what a blockchain operating platform should look like for the grid. This is a grid standardization system that's essentially going to be trying to create global standards for how energy will be traded and operated on the grid. So there's nothing, you really can't ask to be any closer to the source whenever it comes to creating a platform than being a part of the group that creates the standards for the system. So that, and then the Cognitive Foundation is also an open source group that is working on developing a system that allows people to have an open source, understandable system that allows blockchains to talk agnostically to one another. So you're not hemmed into using one set currency or one underlying trading token. You can essentially trade with all the different currencies, because what we fully see is that as we go down the road, these are going, some people don't want to trade in fiat, some people don't want to trade in ETH, some people don't want to trade in Bitcoin. And as these decisions get made and new things come and go, we want to be able to agnostically talk to any and all of them simultaneously. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're doing is we're trying to bring clean energy to help clean up to emerging markets, to help clean up the energy supply in emerging markets, but also give everybody who wants to support these projects the ability to invest and profit from them, while having the ability to own a portion of the energy exchange platform that's built on blockchain, helping to promote that in the energy sector, and also to create the social impact and social good that comes out of being a part of helping everybody, helping all the boats rise together. So, thank you very much.
Great. Perhaps you mentioned this, and I didn't catch it, but this is an STO that you're doing domestically?
Yes, it is a security token, yes. Reg D, and we will, I'm certain, we will be doing Reg S once we're open to that, but currently we're only be registered in the United States.
Right. And who is your counsel on this, please?
Well, we have some counsel through BX3, and then we also are working with the group, Scott Deathridge out of Dallas, Texas. He's energy and blockchain attorney, Harvard guy.
Gotcha. Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Michael, you get reaction from the traditional energy industry about the project? What feedback do you have? Do you have competitors? People want to try this themselves, or?
So that is the interesting thing is we're getting a lot of feedback from groups in the industry that want to see how they can apply this to their own projects. And what we always tell people is we fully understand that this is not magic in the sense that it can be done. Other people can use the same model, but frankly, that doesn't hurt our feelings. Like it's sort of like the power purchase agreement drove the proliferation of solar over the last 20 years. We fully support tools that allow people to mobilize these projects. However, as as an energy developer who is going down the road of doing this, I can tell you, anybody who thinks that this would be easier than just deploying a normal project, it is not necessarily the path of least resistance. So there are groups that we're more getting interest for people who want to look to us as for project acquisition for the itself, more than we are getting people asking how they replicate.
So how do you guys differ from companies like Power Ledger and WePower? What's your differentiating component?
So Power Ledger's, I actually really like their system. Their exchange is actually really more for their rooftop in Australia. There's a good chance that something along that some component of their system could be very good and applicable for us. But I don't, they're not really thinking of like a utility level exchange. We're definitely more of a, just because of the space we play in as utility scale developers, we're definitely more focused on, multi-hundred megawatt systems that are going to be feeding large parts of the grid or creating our own microgrids in areas where they don't exist. One of the other major advantages of these type of systems is the existing grid that you have around here. The example I always give people is it's like if you brought Alexander Graham Bell back and handed him an iPhone, he'd be like, what on earth is that? But if you brought Thomas Edison back and showed him a substation, he'd be like, I designed that system. Like it is, the technology is that old. Now there are components that are better, but these large regional systems are so vulnerable and they're so outdated that taking targeted generation into places that need it, and especially using cleaner resources in those applications, is just not only a far smarter approach, but it's a much safer approach. He was former director of the CIA under Clinton, and his example was the cascading blackout that hit the East Coast years back was a raccoon climbed into a substation and tried a relay, and then there was a cascading failure as power jumped up to the next substations. And what he used to say is, someday there will be a terrorist smarter than a raccoon. And it's the truth. And these large regional systems have that inherent vulnerability. So by distributing generation resources around, not only do you prevent the single weakness of an entire region, but you also have the ability, if you do have a cascading failure, to feed from those other smaller areas back into the system and help support it. So it's a multi-pronged approach. It's just a lot of those value propositions are way off in the weeds and not usually in the purview of people.
So how then are you handling the data modeling for determining where you need to be implementing infrastructure?
So on our initial projects that we are working on in Mexico, one at least in Puerto Rico, these are really based on connections, personal connections. So we have consultants, multiple consultants that work with us in Mexico that are former regional directors with CFE, which is the grid operator there. And so what they do is they essentially bring us into areas and say, these guys have seen 40% increases in their energy prices just because supply is so constrained in this area, but they've got the capacity on the lines to build, a gigawatt more of power in this area. So it's you've got the price, the availability of space on the lines, and so they're giving us guidance that's specifically in our regions that we're focusing on in Mexico. In Puerto Rico, it's through contacts that have, I was working as doing solar development for their utilities, actually right up until the moment when they lost their bankability. And so we actually know the president of the Senate and then also the new CEO for PREPA, the Puerto Rico Energy and Power Authority. So it's all being guided by personal connections and demand. As the fund allows us to focus on the areas, the key areas that we want to focus on are India, and Africa, because those are the two best emerging markets as far as going after for new opportunities. We've actually had people reaching out to us from both of those regions, interested in seeing how we can connect with them and help them develop projects in the future.
So will you be issuing new tokens as expansion continues, or is the token just going to get more than that?
So we are working with BX3 and some other advisors on the tokenomics for that side of it, because that really is a huge question. I can tell you I've had adamant responses from people that you definitively had to create another fund, or we definitively could not create another fund and had to use the buyback to deploy in future projects. And when you hear people lay out the value proposition, and you hear the pros and cons of each, I have never heard one side of that argument entirely went out over the other. So we're working with the advisory groups and frankly investors to say, okay, which way would you prefer to see it done? There's a chance that there might be an evolution in some token application, either smart contracts or something that might open up the door and make it just obvious that a new token would be the answer in the future. But currently, I think it would really work best if we kept it all under the AR3, the original token, because that allows people to, the new assets plus the project acquisition assets, and then the bought and retired tokens. It just seems to be a huge win for all the investors.
Michael, has the raccoon been jailed or did it die?
Imagine vaporized. It was thrown away.
Yeah, I can tell you, I actually worked in oil and gas when I started in the energy industry a long time ago. I was a roughneck offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. And when I transitioned to clean energy and working on solar projects, yeah, if you work in electricity, you learn to respect electricity. I would never be as foolish as a raccoon. I'm not going to be the guy who replaces the raccoon in that equation. All right, thank you.
That was great. And really quickly, just to wrap us up, we are going to have a cocktail hour outside if people want to continue networking, chat a bit, ask some more questions about projects, things you may not have been comfortable asking in a large group. We like the way this turned out, and we're super happy. Thanks to everybody, to our projects for coming and telling us their stories. Thanks to our investors for coming and sitting with us and hearing these stories. And I hope there's connection. I hope there's things that resonate with you as investors. I hope there's things that you like as projects and you can add into your own projects and make them better. Thanks to our Pitch TV guys for coming and live streaming us and adding to our multiples of people who are watching and getting to hear the message. So we've got, we sold or we invited, I think, 8 projects to pitch today. I think we ended up with 7, but we ended up with 4 waitlisted. So I love the way this went today. I think there's an opportunity to do it again. Like I said, we have four pitches in the works. So I'm gonna, kind of get some feedback from everybody, take a look, see what we can do better, and look to do another one of these in a couple months, and go at it again. But this was a great success, and we appreciate everybody coming. We look forward to just grabbing a drink with you afterwards. So thanks again.